Hello everyone! Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Andy Cohen rebukes Martina Navratilova's anti-surrogacy stance on air. In a recent and candid exchange that has captivated both gossip and social commentary circles, Andy Cohen publicly challenged Martina Navratilova's controversial statements regarding surrogacy, labeling them ill-informed and dumb. The remark came during a heated segment on Cohen's SiriusXM show, Andy Cohen Live, where he refused to mince words about the former tennis legend's stance. He firmly stated that her now-deleted social media post, declaring surrogacy is just wrong. Sometimes you can't have it all, was both misguided and damaging, especially to families reliant on assisted reproductive technology. Well, here's the deal, that's just ill-informed and dumb. Basically, she's uninformed on the issue, so I just think she's not informed. It's a bad take. What can I tell you? She's just wrong, Cohen stated. Moreover, Cohen's perspective is deeply rooted in personal experience. As a father to 2 children born via gestational surrogacy, he not only lives the practice he defends, but also played a vital role in helping legalize it in New York, culminating in the passage of the Child Parent Security Act. Complicating the narrative further is the viewpoint of Julia Limagova, Navratilova's wife, and Real Housewives of Miami star. On an episode of Watch What Happens Live, hosted by Cohen himself, Limagova distanced herself from her wife's viewpoint. "Martina and I share a bed, but we don't share a brain," she declared, underscoring her personal support for surrogacy and suggesting that Navratilova's comments were taken out of context. Nevertheless, Cohen remained unyielding. Despite Limagova's efforts to soften the blow, he emphasized that the original message was explicit and needed addressing. He plans to bring the topic up again at the upcoming Real Housewives of Miami reunion, though Navratilova herself will not attend. This unfolding controversy shines a spotlight on broader societal debates around reproductive rights and LGBTQ+ family building. Accordingly, the clash between a celebrated media figure and a sports icon is not simply tabloid fodder. It's emblematic of evolving conversations regarding choice, support, and the dignity of families born through modern reproductive methods. The air inside Bravo's Midtown Manhattan studio was electric that morning, the kind of taut, charged atmosphere that happens when you know something unplanned is about to unfold. Andy Cohen, host, producer, and professional wielder of side-eye, was in his element. The set lights shimmered against the polished acrylic desk, the coffee mugs gleamed, and somewhere backstage, the crew whispered about how spicy the day's segment might get. The guest? Tennis legend Martina Navratilova. The topic? Family, parenthood, and the cultural debates around surrogacy. The green room buzz had hinted that Martina would speak her mind, and Andy had been doing live TV long enough to know that "speak her mind" was code for possibly start a fire and then smile while it burns. They greeted each other warmly enough, with Martina offering that athletic, no-nonsense handshake and Andy returning his signature grin. But beneath his cheerful host exterior, Andy was already sharpening his responses like a chef honing knives. "Martina," he began, leaning back in his chair with practiced ease, "you've been open about your views on a lot of things. Recently, you've voiced pretty strong opposition to surrogacy. Some people agreed with you. Others, not so much." He lifted an eyebrow in that way that means not so much as doing a lot of work in the sentence. Martina didn't hesitate. "I think surrogacy commodifies women's bodies," she said plainly. "It turns babies into products. I know people want children, but there are so many who need adoption. Why not go that route instead of renting a loan?" Andy took a breath, the kind that's both theatrical and deeply personal. This wasn't just an academic debate for him. His son Ben was born through surrogacy. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been one of the most profound experiences of his life. "I hear you," Andy said, voice steady. "But I have to stop you right there, because for people like me, single, gay, wanting to be a parent, surrogacy isn't about commodification. It's about creating the family we dreamed of. It's about love. My surrogate wasn't a womb for rent. She was a partner in one of the most meaningful things I've ever done. The audience murmured. A camera operator's lens shifted slightly to capture Martina's reaction. She sat straighter, her gaze unwavering. I'm not saying people who do it don't love their kids. I'm saying the system can exploit women, especially those in financial need. It's about the principle. Andy nodded slowly. And I think principles are important. But so are realities. In my case, my surrogate was not financially desperate. She was a nurse, married, with kids of her own. She wanted to help people have families. She chose this. She was empowered in her decision. And to call that exploitation, well, it erases her agency. A flicker of tension crossed Martina's face. The tennis champion in her wasn't one to yield mid-match. But what about in countries where women are exploited? We can't ignore that darker side. Of course not, Andy replied, leaning forward now. We should absolutely push for ethical surrogacy laws. Regulate it. Protect women from coercion, but banning it outright, or shaming people who use it, isn't protecting women. It's punishing families who could never exist otherwise. The audience burst into light applause. Andy's voice warmed with personal conviction. You know, when I held Ben for the first time, I wasn't thinking about politics or contracts. I was thinking about how lucky I was that someone cared enough to carry him for me. The bond between me and my surrogate is real. It's based on respect, gratitude, and friendship. She didn't feel used. She felt proud. She's still in our lives, and Ben will grow up knowing exactly who she is and how loved he was before he was even born. Martina's eyes softened just a fraction. The fire in her voice dimmed to something closer to contemplation. I suppose I can't argue with your personal story, she said, though her tone suggested her broader stance remained intact. And I'm not asking you to, Andy said gently. But I do think it's worth remembering that surrogacy isn't one single narrative. It's thousands of stories. Some tragic, yes, but many deeply beautiful. When we talk about it, we have to hold space for all of them, not just the worst examples. The studio felt quieter now, the earlier sharpness blunted by mutual respect. Still, Andy wasn't done making his point. Look, Martina, he continued, I've seen you fight for causes that matter. You've stood up for LGBT+ rights when it wasn't popular. You've been a champion for women in sports. In a way, surrogacy is tied to those same ideas. The right to choose what's best for your own life, your own body, your own family. If we start deciding for women what they can and can't do with their bodies in this context, where does that end? Martina crossed her arms, but there was no hostility in the gesture, just a guarded curiosity. So you see it as empowerment? I do, Andy said without hesitation. Empowerment with protections, with ethics, with consent. But yes, absolutely. For my surrogate, carrying Ben was her choice, her gift. For me, it was a lifeline. And for Ben, it's the reason he's here, sleeping in his little crib, probably dreaming about bottles and stuffed animals right now. The audience chuckled, the tension easing further. Martina smiled faintly, shaking her head in that way athletes do when they've been surprised by a worthy opponent. Well, I can't argue with baby dreams, she said. Andy grinned. See, we're finding common ground already. The segment wrapped with polite applause, but as the credits rolled, the conversation didn't stop. Off camera, they talked more quietly about the nuances, the good and bad stories, the legal patchworks in different countries, the emotional complexity for all involved. Martina admitted she hadn't met many parents through surrogacy who could share their experiences firsthand. Andy promised to introduce her to a few friends. When the cameras were off and the microphones unhooked, Andy sat for a moment, looking out at the dimming studio lights. He knew not everyone watching would agree with him. But he also knew that speaking from lived experience and challenging a high-profile voice like Martina's mattered. Every time the conversation was nuanced instead of black and white, there was a chance for understanding. Later that evening, On his Instagram stories, Andy posted a picture of Ben giggling in a high chair, mashed bananas on his cheeks. The caption was simple: "This is why I speak up." And somewhere, perhaps while sipping tea in her own home, Martina scrolled past the image, pausing just a little longer than she might have before.